we still have a few minutes left. While we're waiting for the webinar to start, it would be great just to kind of see where folks are, logging in from. So in the chat for Zoom, if you can just kind of put in, what state you're from, what classes you teach, what grades you teach, that would be really cool just to kind of get familiar with who's on the call. If you've never used Zoom before, you can find Zoom by clicking on the little speech bubble. Sorry, you can find the chat in Zoom by clicking on the little speech bubble icon and clicking on that. So I see already Carrie, Harold, and Denise Payton have already entered in. Denise is from Oklahoma, grades 9 through 12, computers 1 and 2. Carrie from Wisconsin teaches business classes and personal finance. I see some more teachers entering their states in there too. So awesome, thank you everyone. So I'm seeing Florida, New Hampshire, Illinois, Wisconsin, New York, Texas. The answers are coming in so quickly, I think I'm missing a few, but Nebraska, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Missouri. Awesome, great to see so many states being represented today. And I also see a wide variety of classes being taught. So I see money management, marketing, law, economics, business, US history, consumer education and sports marketing, very cool. Wealth building and management, accounting, career education. This is great. Lots and lots of variety in classes that are being taught. So that's awesome. All right. Great, and if you are just signing on to join us on the call, welcome. We're just putting in, what state you are from, what classes you're teaching, etc., in the chat function of Zoom. You can access the chat by clicking on the little speech bubble icon on your menu, and you can just put in your info in there, and we'll get started in about a minute. Great question from Peter here. Peter, I see that you've probably attended a lot of our virtual PDs. Will we be using Nearpod today? We actually won't be using Nearpod, so I'll be addressing that in just a second, but great question, Peter. All right, let's get started. So welcome, first of all, to the Brush Up on Content webinar on taxes. We offered this webinar last week, and we did use Nearpod, but we ran into some technical difficulties while using Nearpod. So what we decided to do was, for webinars, since it's mostly content-driven, we would just keep it to Google Slides, kind of keep our original format. For those of you guys who have not been on a virtual PD with us before, the webinars are a little bit different in that the virtual PD, you usually will be working with your peers here on the call. We usually put you into breakout rooms. You're doing some kind of activity. But the webinar is a little bit more kind of like direct instruction, me just kind of reviewing content. We're still going to be doing some fun stuff during the webinar, but you're not actually going to be put into groups or asked to do anything with other people on the call. So that's kind of the main difference. But it's great to see a lot of familiar faces here on the call. Really, really awesome. I love seeing everyone online. And also just really cool to see people having attended our virtual PDs are also attending today's webinar. So great to have you guys on. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Sonia. I'm one of the curriculum developers and online PD facilitators here at NGPF. And I've been here for a little over 3 years, and super fun to meet all of you guys in person and also virtually. So awesome. So in today's webinar, we are of course going to be brushing up on content knowledge for taxes. And I also hope that I will give you guys some ideas for resources that you can use in your classroom. I do want to say that the goal is not to give specific tax advice. So it's more going to be talking about the factual part of taxes. So just kind of want to put that little disclaimer in there. So what we're going to be talking about content-wise is we're going to do a little overview of our tax system here in the United States. We'll talk about specific tax forms that teenagers need to know about. Then, of course, we're going to go into the more kind of nitty-gritty details of what are the requirements to actually file a tax return. And then we'll talk about tax filing for teens. One thing I want to note is that all of our taxes content is up to date. So all of the content that is relevant for filing your taxes is up to date for the 2019 filing year. And everything that is related to like the new W-4 form, which I'll be talking about, is updated for the 2020 W-4. There are just a few things that we're kind of wrapping the updates on. So things like comprehension questions, unit exams, diagnostic and final exams, basically any assessments for taxes. We're still in the finishing stages of updating those, but all of the lessons and activities and supplemental resources that you'll use in the, while teaching the content, that should be good to go. So our hope is hopefully by the end of this week or early next week, all of the assessments will be done as well. All right, so before we get started with the content, I wanted to get a good sense of, who's on the call, what is your familiarity with taxes in general. So I'm gonna launch a poll. So you should see on your screen, what is your familiarity with NGPF? Take about 15 seconds to answer this question. Take about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna close the poll here and I'm gonna share the results so we can kind of see. So you can see that there's a good number of people here who are brand new, so welcome. That's super, super exciting to see. A good number of you guys have used NGPF before a few times, and awesome, you're looking to incorporate more of it. And also a really good handful of you guys have used NGPF a few times a month and also on an almost daily basis or a daily basis. So great to kind of see, it's kind of a nice mix. The next thing I want to do is I have a second poll for you guys, and I'm going to launch it here in just a sec. Which of the following topics do you feel least confident teaching? And I see some people in their cameras here making faces. They're like, oh gosh. So take about 15 seconds here to answer that question. The least confident teaching. All right, take about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna end the poll and share the results with you guys. So, okay, so it looks like most people are comfortable, or everyone is comfortable explaining why we pay taxes, but explaining the US tax system, this doesn't surprise me at all. The tax system in the US is not the easiest thing to understand, so definitely doesn't surprise me here. And then I also see a good number of people who chose the different forms and deadlines, requirements to file a tax return, and how to file a tax return. So good news is we're going to be talking about all 5 of these topics today. So hopefully today's webinar will help you feeling more confident in teaching whatever subject that you chose here. All right, so one thing I want to show you guys, especially if you're new to NGPF, you might be wondering, where do I actually find where do I actually find the taxes content on the NGPF website? So you can find the taxes content by going to, and I might just actually see if I can pull this up for you. There we go. So I'm pulling up the NGPF website right now. And this is the taxes unit page. So the way you can get here is if you go to curriculum, if you click on units, once you get to that units page, you would just click on taxes, and this is where you're going to find all of that stuff. So on the left-hand side here, you can see our semester course lessons and our full year lesson plans. These are fully designed lesson plans ready to implement in the classroom. And on the right-hand side, you'll see all of our supplemental resources like activities, projects, case studies, all that kind of stuff. A good number of these things on the right-hand side are going to be already embedded in the lessons on the left-hand side. That doesn't mean all of them are going to be in, but a good number of them will already be in the lesson. So these are not like completely extra resources. Just keep that in mind. All right. Let me go back to our slides here. Oh, and I'll also add that during the webinar, feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. I'm going to be doing my best to kind of check intermittently in the chat, but I apologize if I don't get to your question right away. I'll be checking it kind of on and off during the webinar. All right. Okay, so let's dive right in. I first wanted to take a few minutes to talk about our tax system. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you guys a really awesome video that I think is in all of our courses that have taxes in it. And it talks about, it's called If Paychecks Could Talk. I know a lot of people here have probably used this video in their own classrooms. And it does a really good job of explaining why do we pay taxes in the United States, and where does that money come from, and what is it spent on? So I'm going to play this on my laptop, and we'll take some time to watch the video.
Here's your paycheck. Oh yeah, my first paycheck. Earned $2,100, but I'm only taking home $1,600. What gives?
Yeah, I get that a lot. You're expecting something a little bigger, huh?
What? Who's talking?
It's me, down here.
Huh?
There's a reason your take-home pay isn't higher. Taxes.
Man, I hate taxes.
Hold on there, big guy. Just like I'm your income, taxes make up the government's income. Without taxes, our government couldn't provide services that people want and need.
Yeah, but where do all my taxes go?
Funny you should ask. If you got a minute, I'll tell you the story of your federal taxes.
Yeah, geez, sounds thrilling. But bummer, I've got that combo colonoscopy root canal.
Sit down and listen. Did you know that the U.S. federal budget is more than $3 trillion? How the government raises the funds to pay the bills and thinks about spending affects you directly. Let's start by looking at my stuff.
Okay.
First, here's your FICA, or payroll taxes. They're collected from both you and your employer, and they pay for things like earned benefits. They flow into a pot of money called trust funds. Now, let's look at your federal income taxes. They go into a much larger pot of money called the federal funds. Between your FICA taxes and income taxes, folks like you are the government's main bill payers. Now let's talk about borrowing. When the government spends more than it takes in, it has to borrow. Borrowing, the deficit, is larger when the economy is bad. More people are unemployed and paying fewer taxes, and there's more need for government services. Borrowed money contributes to the federal fund as well. That's the government's income in a nutshell.
But what does all that money buy?
Now, my friend, that's the trillion-dollar question. In 2013, the government will spend more than $3.7 trillion broken out into 3 chunks: mandatory, discretionary, and interest on our national debt. Remember those FICA taxes you paid? They go to trust funds, which help pay for mandatory spending that's required by law. For example, Social Security and Medicare. Everyone over 62 is eligible for this support. A big portion of federal funds, that is your federal income taxes, goes to discretionary spending that happens at the discretion of the president and Congress every single year. One discretionary item, for example, is the military. 57% of all discretionary spending goes to the military. Down here, 6% of discretionary spending goes to education. Things like Head Start and community colleges and Pell Grants. Discretionary spending plus mandatory spending plus interest we have to pay on our national debt equal all federal spending. But the story doesn't end there. States and cities and towns count on a sizable chunk of this federal money. People like you also get money from the federal government when you need it, in the form of support like unemployment, disability insurance. In 2010, folks in Colorado received an average of $4,081 each. Any questions?
Yeah, but what does any of it do for me?
Really? Just a few things like making sure you breathe clean air and drink good water, making sure all people have access to affordable housing, funding for your favorite national park, cancer research, and elder services.
All right. So that video does a really, really great job of, let me just close the window here. That video does a really great job, I think, of explaining, why do we pay taxes? Where does that money come from? What kind of taxes do we spend that money on? You'll notice, obviously, that the data is a little bit out of date, but the reason we kept it in our taxes resources is because we just really feel like the overall message of the video of, again, why we pay taxes and where it goes is still really, really true. Like that content has not changed. And throughout our taxes lessons, we've updated the figures that students have to actually know. So they might be citing data from 2013 and stuff, but still the majority of, or a big portion of our tax money is spent still on the military, and very little is spent on education. So like not so much has changed in that regard that we felt like we had to change the video, because the other stuff is still really, really important. All right, so moving on here, here's a slide. I know there's a lot of text here. I'm not going to read everything here, but just in summary, I've highlighted the orange parts of the line. So where does all that money come from in terms of tax? So again, income taxes paid by employees to federal and state government, payroll taxes, right, that all employers have to pay. Corporate income tax is another one. And then, of course, we have excise, estate, and other types of taxes as well. And then what is it spent on? Just like the video said, a big portion of that money is spent on three things: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and defense. Again, that's just maybe about 2/3 of the money, but the rest of that 1/3 is spent on other programs. All right. The other thing that I'm sure you guys talk about in your classroom is the fact that the US has a progressive tax system. There's also regressive tax systems, and I think I forgot what the third one is. I think it might be proportional, but I'm kind of forgetting what that third one is. But anyways, US one has a progressive tax system. So in simple words, just, tax rate increases as your taxable amount increases. So this is pretty straightforward. The more you make, the more that you're going to be taxed. The thing that I think there's a huge misconception amongst both students and adults is the difference between a marginal tax rate and your effective tax rate. And I'm going to be showing you guys a really popular video in just a second that'll break this down in a more digestible format. So the thing to note here is that your marginal tax rate is the highest tax rate that is being applied to a portion of your income. And this will make sense in the video. The effective tax rate is the actual percentage you pay on your taxes. So just keep these two terms in mind. We're gonna be coming back to them in just a second. Before we watch the video, I wanted to just make a note that the video cites some data from 2019. So you can see here on the left-hand side, as you guys know, here are the federal income tax brackets for 2019. And on the right-hand side are the up-to-date 2020 federal income tax brackets. The tax rates, I believe, have stayed the same, but the income for the different whether you're single, married, filing jointly, that stuff has changed slightly. So for the video, just keep in mind that they're using 2019 tax brackets and figures, and also keep in mind that the 2020 standard deduction for a single filer, in 2019 it was $12,000, and this year it is $12,200 for 2020. All right, I just see a few comments coming up here in the chat, so let me just really briefly check that before we watch the video. Some great questions here. Will we be getting this PowerPoint later? Yes, I'm going to be emailing you guys the slides. Oh, and Stephanie, thank you for confirming. So the three types of tax systems are regressive, proportional, and progressive. Awesome. All right, and then Ariel asked, what does it mean to be married filing separate? So again, not being a married person myself, I think that just means you are married, but you are filing two separate tax returns. You also have the option to be married, but you're filing kind of a joint tax return. So on your W-4, I believe, and on your 1040, you would select whether like which one you're filing. So if anyone here has, I'm sure there are many more experts here on the call who can answer that in a little bit more detail. So feel free to add to the chat. So what we're going to do now is keep that marginal and effective tax, those two terms in mind. We're going to watch this really, really cool video by Vox that talks about how tax brackets actually work. And we'll talk about one of the biggest misconceptions that most people have about how these tax brackets work. Oops. There we go. Oh,
At Farmers Insurance,
an ad here, so give me a second here to skip the ad.
These are tax brackets for 2019. Simple, right? But many of us make a common mistake when looking at this. Let's say my income is $84,000. You might think that puts me in the third bracket, so I would owe the federal government 22% of my income. This is wrong, and it's causing us to have uninformed debates about tax policy. Here's how it actually works. Let's go back to my $84,000 income. Now, instead of thinking of tax rates as brackets, we should think of them as pockets. But first, there's one special pocket we need to talk about. The money we put in this pocket is not taxed. The government automatically lets single people put $12,000 in this special pocket, and more for couples. But if you spend a lot of money on things like medical expenses or charitable donations, you can sometimes put in more. These are called deductions. With the $70,000 that's left over, you can start filling up the pockets. The first pocket only has room for $9,700, so I only pay 10% on this money. Then I pay 12% on the money in the next pocket. And then 22% on the money in this pocket. These are called marginal tax rates, and that's how these brackets actually work. So if I get a raise, that new money goes into the first pocket with empty space. When space runs out, we put it in the next pocket. So the raise, and only the raise, would be partially taxed at 22% and partially at 24%. When politicians say they want to raise the top tax rate, it doesn't necessarily mean these pockets and your money are affected. They're talking about tax rates on the pockets way over there, which are only used once people have filled in these smaller ones. Marginal tax rates are a pretty simple concept once you hang it. So the next time a politician says the government wants to take away 70% of your income, just send them this video.
All right. So it gets a little bit political there at the end, but you don't have to show that part to your students if you don't want to. The main reason I really like that video, and I'm sure you guys will agree, I think I saw some comments in the chat, that it takes this concept of how do tax brackets work and just really illustrates it in a very easy to understand way. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have found that not most, but a lot of people have this misconception, just as the video said, that let's say you make $50,000 a year, whatever tax bracket that $50,000 falls in is the percentage that you're going to be taxed, and then it's like end of day, like that's it. But as the video shows, that's not actually how it works. Each part of your income is being taxed at a different amount, and it just keeps going higher and higher the more and more you make. So I think this video does a really great job. You can find this in our lessons, and I will also try to remember to link to the video in the email that I send. I'll try to remember to do that. So definitely, this is a great video to use in the classroom if your students are maybe struggling with, how do the actual tax brackets work? All right. So moving right along to tax forms that teens need to know. So I wanted to actually give you guys maybe about a minute to do a quick little activity here. This is actually from our activity, which you can find on the taxes unit page, called Compare Tax Forms and Their Purpose. And it's just a one-page worksheet. And on that worksheet, I took a screenshot from that activity. You can see here that you have a few different descriptions of different forms, and at the very bottom there's a list of tax forms. Your job right now is to match the tax form to the description. So if you have a piece of paper, or if you want to just do this mentally, or do it on your computer, however you want to do it, take about a minute to read through these descriptions and just quickly jot down what form down below do you think matches the description here. All right, take about 30 more seconds. It's great to see a lot of people in the chat are saying that they've already used this activity, or they really like this activity. So that's really cool. Awesome. So I'm going to switch slides now and go to the answer key. So again, this is a direct screenshot from the answer key, so you guys can actually review your answers. So, the first one was a W-2, the second one was a 1099. The main difference between those two is whether you were a full-time employee versus you were an employee, but you were just paid by the company. So based off of that distinction, you're either going to get a W-2 or you will get a 1099 by the end of January. The third one is the 1040. Obviously, that is the key form that you use in April to file your taxes, or before April if you are not procrastinating. The fourth one, you are the W-4, so you use this to determine how much money is going to get withdrawn from your paycheck. And the final one is the I-9. You use that form to prove that you're eligible to work in the United States. So these are kind of the key forms that students really need to know about as they're learning about taxes. And it sounds like a lot of you guys have already used that activity, so that's great to hear. I wanted to take a minute here to talk about the new W-4 form. So some people may already know this, but basically this year, the federal government released a new W-4 form. So it looks a little bit different. I took a screenshot of the whole page on the left-hand side here. One of the biggest differences that you'll notice is that they've completely gotten rid of allowances. So before, that used to be a big part of the taxes content. The number of allowances that you claimed, maybe 0, 1, 2, however many, had a huge impact on how much was being withdrawn from your paycheck. But the government actually completely eliminated the allowances altogether. And doing a little research, they made that change so that your amount withdrawn would be a little bit more accurate. So they completely got rid of that part. I know it's probably small on your screen, but if you look at the W-4, you'll see that there are 5 sections. basically for a really straightforward tax situation, like if you're a single filer, no dependents, all that kind of stuff, you're probably just going to be completing step 1 and step 5. Steps 2, 3, and 4 are optional, and you only fill them out if you have multiple jobs, or if your spouse works, if you're claiming dependents, or if you have other adjustments that you want to make. So probably for most high schoolers, they're just going to be doing 1 and 5. The other thing to note is that you only have to fill out the W-4 if you were hired this year. So if you were working at your current job prior to 2020, your current W-4 will still work. You might still want to fill out the new W-4 form simply because the government has made these changes to make the amount withheld more accurate. So just, something to keep in mind. And of course, as you guys know, the W-4 is the form that's going to impact how much your take-home pay is going to be, or your net pay, because it's going to impact how much is withdrawn. So that was probably one of the biggest changes for this tax year. Again, it's not going to impact the 2019 tax return that you're filing this year, but it's going to impact any income that you earn this current year. And here, again, I'm going to be sending you guys these slides, but I wanted to give you guys some specific resources from our taxes unit that you can use to teach, the W-4, how to read a pay stub, the W-2 form. And then I've also listed an additional resource here called Research the Tax Cycle. So the activity that we just did earlier, where you guys were comparing the tax forms, was number 4. A lot of teachers like to follow that one with number 5, where students actually have to identify the dates at which they have to do different steps within the tax cycle. So, by when do employers have to send you a W-2? When is the filing deadline for this year's, tax deadline? Stuff like that. And that is also a 1-page worksheet. So lots of teachers like to kind of pair those 2 activities together. The other thing I'll mention is, as you can see here in the orange text at the bottom, is that in our teacher toolkit, which you can find on our website, we have a section of templates. One of those templates is a W-2 template. So if you've ever been in a situation where you were like, oh, I wish I could create a custom W-2 for some kind of activity for my students, we have a custom W-2 template in the teacher toolkit. So definitely look for that if that is something that you're interested in. All right, let's move on to requirements to file. So this is one of my favorite sections because there's so many little details that go into determining whether someone has to file a tax return or not. And I mean legally required to file a tax return. So I'm excited to share some resources with you guys here. On the slide, you guys can see here are the current figures for the current tax year. So the 2019 tax year that we're going to be filing this coming April. So the standard deduction is $12,200 right now. If you're a dependent under the age of 65 and single, you must pay taxes if you earned more than $12,200. If you are not a dependent, again, you have to file taxes if you earn more than $12,200. There are also other figures here that you can read through. I don't want to bore you guys too much by reading every single word on this slide, but the main thing to really remember is $12,200. If you make more than that, you're legally required. If you make less, you most likely will not be required to file. The other thing here on the right-hand side, the right-hand column, if you're self-employed and you earn more than $400, then you have to pay taxes as well. So that we'll come back to that in just a minute. So here are some frequently asked questions that you probably also hear in the classroom. So, if a teenager doesn't meet that filing requirement of $12,200 or the self-employment tax, why should a teenager file a tax return in the first place? And the answer, as you guys probably know, is that they will probably get a refund for any of the income tax that was withdrawn from their paycheck. Keep in mind that those FICA taxes that they paid towards Social Security and Medicare, those they will not get a refund for because those are just taken out and that's it. But any income taxes that they may have paid, and if they didn't have to pay them and if they were still withheld, they're probably going to get a refund for that amount. The second question is, can I file a tax return if my parents claim me as a dependent? And you know, there are lots of misconceptions about this, but the short answer is yes, you absolutely can file a tax return if your parents claim you as a dependent. And in fact, again, if you meet those requirements to file a tax return, you're actually legally required to file that return. And finally, frequently asked question number 3, what does it actually mean to be self-employed, right? So remember, if you earn more than $400 through self-employment, you owe those self-employment taxes. So there's a great article in one of our lessons. I just took a screenshot from one of those articles. Some things to keep in mind, and this is really, really relevant to teens, is that, again, if you earn more than $400 through self-employment, you have to pay taxes. However, individuals who provide babysitting, lawn mowing services are actually viewed by the IRS as household employees. So in these cases, that employee, if they're younger than 18, they are actually not subject to Social Security and Medicare taxes. So if they are also newspaper carriers, distributors, vendors, and they're under the age of 18, they actually are exempt from these self-employment taxes. So just a few things to keep in mind. If any of your students are self-employed, you know, lots of teenagers, as you guys know, provide babysitting services, maybe lawn mowing. So just some stuff to consider. All right. So I wanted to give you guys a chance to experience a little bit of one of my favorite activities in the taxes curriculum called Play Should They File a Tax Return. So again, this can be found on the taxes unit page under activities. And students are given about 13 different personas. And you might recognize some of the names if you're familiar with the NGPF team. But basically, each person has their own unique situation. And for each person, students have to answer the same 3 questions. So I wanted to give you guys a chance to just kind of experience 2 of these scenarios. And this whole activity is presented in slide format, so it's a really fun, like, whole class activity to do. Again, if you have a piece of paper or maybe a notepad up on your computer, go ahead and take that out, because you guys are going to be answering 3 questions with yes or no in just a second. All right. So let's take a look at situation number 1. So we're looking at Tim, who is 16 years old. He's a high school student, lives with his parents, and he earned $5,200 at his part-time job. The 3 questions you guys are going to be answering are on the right-hand side. Number 1, can this person be claimed as a dependent? 2, is this person legally required to file a tax return, and why or why not? And 3, if no, should they file a tax return? Explain your reasoning. I'm going to give you guys about a minute to answer these 3 questions. Take about 20 more seconds in case you're still deliberating. And someone asked in the chat, is dependent defined somewhere? So yes, in the taxes curriculum, we do have a resource that specifically outlines, like, what is it, what qualifies, what qualifications are outlined so that you can identify whether someone is a dependent or not. All right, so let's take a look at the answers. Oopsie, sorry. There we go. Sorry, I think I accidentally linked to the activity itself. So you guys are now getting a nice preview of what the activity looks like. It's a nice slide format, but I'm going to close on it and try to, there we go. All right, so here are the answers. So yes, no, and yes. So Tim can be claimed as a dependent. He is not legally required to file that tax return because he didn't make that minimum income requirement. And should he file a tax return? Yes, because he will likely get a refund for any of the income taxes that he paid. All right, let's do one more. So we're going to look at Jessica. And for those of you who are not familiar with the NGPF team, these are the co-founders of NGPF, Tim and Jessica. And if you play the rest of the game, you'll likely see the rest of the team on there. So Jessica is 17 years old. She's a high school student, lives with her parents. She earned $3,600 at her part-time job. She claimed exempt on her W-4. Take about 30 seconds to answer those same 3 questions. And as you guys are wrapping up your answers, I'm just going to take some time to answer some of the questions. So great question from Carrie. Is this activity in the semester course? Carrie, off the top of my head, I don't remember if it's in there, although I have a feeling that we added it in recently. So that doesn't quite help you, but I'll have to see. Regardless though, it is on the taxes unit page under activities. So definitely you can still find it. I just don't remember exactly. Great suggestion from Larry, who says I can see assigning these as group scenarios as well. Awesome. Okay, awesome. So let's take a look at the answers here for Jessica. So it's yes, no, and no. So yes, she can be claimed as a dependent. No, she is not legally required because again, she didn't make that minimum income requirement. And the last one is no, because she claimed exempt. So if you claim exempt on your W-4 form, you will not have income taxes withheld from your paycheck. Now, if you guys know my colleague Abby, she and I were laughing because if you look at the W-4 form for 2020, in our opinion, they made it kind of weird in how you write exempt on the W-4 form. In the old version, there was like a specific line where you would just write exempt. On the new W-4 form, they just say, write exempt in the space below box 4C or something like that. And it's literally just like blank space. There's no line, there's no number for it or anything like that. So in case your students are asking like, hey, where would I put exempt? And you're looking for a specific spot, there is no specific outline box or line. Like you just put it in that empty space. I don't know why they made it like that, but we just found that a little weird and we had a good chuckle about it here in the office. So just wanted to point that out to you guys. All right, so I'm gonna just check the chat here before we move on. All right. Oh, thank you for clarifying. So I don't know who wrote this because of the name, but someone did say it's in semester course 1.2. So this activity is in there. So thank you guys so much for confirming that. So hopefully you guys like that activity. It's one of my really favorite activities because with each scenario, students are tested with a different variable and they have to answer those same 3 questions. So hopefully you guys will want to use that in the classroom. All right, let's move on to tax filing for teens. Oops. So as you guys probably know, the filing deadline for this year, for the 2019 tax filing year, is April 15th, 2020. It might just be good to mention to students that sometimes because of holidays, that deadline will vary by like a day or 2. I think it was like 2 years ago or something, it was April 17th, but most years it's gonna be April 15th. So I want to actually share with you guys two questions here. I think I pulled these from our data crunches or questions of the day. So I'm actually going to ask you guys here by launching a poll. In which week do you think most Americans file their tax return? I'm going to launch that poll. Go ahead and take 20 seconds to vote. All right, 5 more seconds. And I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So looks like the majority of you guys got the right answer. Most Americans do file their tax return that last week of April. So I'll show you on the following slide. This is taken from, I think, a data crunch or a question of the day, one of those two. And it's a really great graph here that illustrates how there's a huge upsurge in the number of people who file probably in that first week of February. And if you're wondering why, my guess is because your employer is required to send you your W-2 by the end of January. So by that period, by that first week of February, you should have all of your W-2s and you're ready to go. Then you'll see that there's a huge decline in the number of people who file, and then of course a huge upsurge the week of the filing deadline to get those tax returns in. You'll see that there's a number of people who file late, and then there's a little bit of an upsurge in like the late fall, because if you file for an extension to file your taxes, the deadline is then October 15th. So you'll see that this pattern here kind of flows along with those deadlines. So I have one more question for you guys here. Oh wait, actually, sorry, before we do that, just a little bit of info to kind of review. Few ways to file your taxes, as you guys probably know. You can do it in paper and then mail it in. You can e-file, so like use something like TurboTax or some online software. And then of course, if you have maybe a more complicated tax situation, you can use a professional service or person to file your taxes and assist you. Obviously, all of these different types of filing your taxes are going to have different amounts of money that you're going to pay for. If you file it, via the mail, it's going to be free. E-filing, usually minimal or smaller charge, and then professional, depending on how much help you are getting, it's going to be way more expensive. Sometimes we get questions from both students and teachers saying, what are like the pros and cons of getting that refund? And so one of the advantages of having a big refund that some people like to use is that it's a way to kind of force yourself to save money. So in other words, you're having more withheld from your paycheck each month or whatever. And then at the end in April, when you get your refund, you get a big fat check. And that's essentially money that you have saved up throughout the year that you can put towards a vacation or something else. However, there are also disadvantages of going that route. If you are having more money withheld from your paycheck each pay period, you're essentially giving the government an interest-free loan. And what I mean by that is that you are lending the government money, but the government isn't actually paying you any interest in return. So essentially, you're just giving the money for free, and then they're going to give you that same amount of money back. So you could actually instead put that money in a savings account or an investment account and actually be earning interest. So you're kind of losing money in that sense if you look at it in that way. And then of course the other disadvantage is that you would just keep less of your monthly paycheck if you're having more withheld. So just some different perspectives to kind of bring into, what are the advantages and disadvantages. Some teachers have also said like this is a cool topic for like a debate in your class. So if you want to have like a whole class debate, this is a good topic to use. All right. The next question I would like you guys to answer is, how do you think most millennials file their tax returns? So I'm gonna, oops, I forgot, sorry, I stopped sharing that poll. I'm going to launch the second poll here. Go ahead and take 20 seconds to answer that. All right, take 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results here. So the majority of you guys got the answer correct. Most millennials will use digital tax prep tool like TurboTax or some kind of online service. I like that no one chose a brick and mortar company, which is, I just find that pretty funny. Some people might have a friend or family member do it for them, but most millennials will use a like an e-filing software. And I wanted to show you guys the chart associated with that. Again, this is from, I think, a question of the day. So you can see here, the second line is 25 to 34-year-olds, and the blue part stands for digital tax prep. So it says almost half of millennials will use something like TurboTax to file their taxes. It's also really interesting to see how the different filing types vary by age bracket. Like every 9 years it changes. So you can see 65 and over, almost half, well, 42.5 use an accountant, right? So for varying reasons. So just cool little comparison here. All right, just wanted to take a minute here to talk about penalties. So this I thought was really, really interesting. So if you file late versus paying your taxes late, there are different penalties. So if you fail to meet that April 15th deadline, you file your taxes late, you will actually be penalized with a 5% of the balance that you owe. And if you owe a lot of money, that's going to amount to a lot of additional money that you're paying. Let's say you meet the deadline, but then you fail to pay any taxes that you owe by any deadline. You are then going to be charged 0.5% of the balance that is owed. So of course we want to tell students, hey, you want to meet the deadlines for anything, right? But just note that if you fail to meet the filing deadline, you're going to be penalized 10 times more than if you just pay your taxes late. So at least make sure you get that deadline for filing, and of course pay any amount that you owe by the deadline as well. But I just thought that that difference was pretty stark. And I wanted to highlight 2 activities in the NGPF curriculum that I think are really great for as like a summative activity or a summative project, because it really ties the whole taxes unit together. So on the left-hand side here, you'll see our calculate completing a 1040 activity. I know a lot of teachers on today's call have used this activity. This is a really great activity to do with students if you want students to get used to filing a paper version of a 1040. So it's also a really great activity to get students to understand what each line item means in the 1040. So in this activity, we give students 5 different personas: Edgar, Melinda, Angela, Marcus, and Boris. Each one of these 5 people have their own tax situation. They're all different ages, et cetera, et cetera. And students have to actually practice using their W-2 for their job to file a 1040 for that person. It's a really great activity to get students into the habit of filing the actual form. On the right-hand side, you'll see one of our newest activities where we actually have used the Intuit TurboTax simulation. And students can similarly use a persona, use their W-2, and file a tax return for them using the TurboTax simulation. Now, a lot of teachers like to do both of these activities and do the paper version first, and then go ahead and do the TurboTax simulation. Reason being, as I'm sure you guys have found, if you just have students do the TurboTax simulation, they may not understand how all the questions that they're faced with in the software correspond to the actual paper form. So lots of teachers like to do the paper one first and then the simulation. And I just see some comments here in the chat, so just gonna really quickly pause here. Awesome. Yep, so I see some people actually saying, hey, I've done the paper first and then the simulation, and then other people have said they've done the simulation and then they're gonna do the paper one. So awesome, great to see that you guys are using both of them as well. Very cool. So definitely wanted to highlight these two activities, great summative activities and projects to do at the end of the unit. And finally, I wanted to say that this whole time we've been talking only about federal taxes. So I definitely want to make sure that we don't forget about state taxes. So really important to tell students like, hey, your state income tax return is going to be completely separate from the 1040, which is the federal tax return. A few things to note is that not all states have a state income tax. I think last week we released a question of the day that said, I think 7 states do not have a state income tax. So, each state has its own kind of policy. The other thing to note, this may not be relevant for high school students, but if they move to another state during college, this might apply, that if they worked in more than one state, they'll have to file more than one state tax return. So I remember I only found this out when I went to grad school, and then I moved out of California, worked in Massachusetts, and that was the first time that I even realized, like, oh, I have to file a Massachusetts and a California state return. I don't think a lot of students actually know about that. And then finally, just you want to make sure that students also are keeping tabs on the different types of taxes that they may have to pay depending on the state that they're in. So your employer will withhold state and local income taxes, but there might be other types of taxes that maybe just your state has, or maybe just your county has. So, just kind of paying attention to those little intricacies. All right. One more thing that I wanted to highlight here, this is probably more I just found it interesting from like a trivia point of view, that if you e-file your state and federal taxes together with the same filing service, that's probably going to be the best way to go in terms of, it may not be the best idea to file your federal tax return by paper or mail, and then do your state tax return with an e-filing system. The reason is that many states, for identity verification purposes, they won't actually accept a return that's not electronically linked to a federal one. So this was something that I just came across in my research, and I just thought that, that's an interesting piece of information. So if your students are ever asking, can I use one system to file one type of return and the other system to file another one, you probably want to encourage them to use the same one, just so that their state return isn't getting rejected because their paper one hasn't been received by the IRS yet. So little details here. Awesome. So I also wanted to highlight that last week we released a new series of activities, and we launched it with our very first one, specifically for math. So my colleague Abby here, she wrote this whole activity, Math Income Tax Brackets. So we are launching a whole new math series of activities where we scaffold a lot of math, concepts within personal finance. So if you're in touch with your math department, or if you're a math teacher looking to infuse more personal finance into your classroom, these are the series of activities to highlight and to use in your classroom. The great thing about these activities is that think of like Khan Academy. We've embedded 2 videos in the beginning of the activity. The first video is Abby walking students through how to work through a specific math problem in a personal finance context. The second video is a similar video, but then students have to understand what step they have to take next. And then the third step is that they actually do a problem in a worksheet. So it's very nicely scaffolded. So definitely recommend that you check that out. Again, you can find that on our taxes unit page. All right, so we are almost at the top of the hour here. So just a few steps that we're going to take here. I wanted to give you about 20 seconds or so, or 30 seconds to sign up for an upcoming virtual PD. I'm going to put this link, oops, there we go. I'm going to put this link for the virtual PD page in the chat, and just give you guys a few seconds to see what we have coming up, because we have a wide variety of virtual PDs that we have coming up. So definitely check that link out in the chat. So just want to give you guys about 30 seconds, just peruse through, sign up for any of the ones that are coming up. Awesome, great to see. Some people are like, hey, we're already doing the virtual PD that's coming up. So thank you actually for that reminder. I will kind of hurry things along here so you're not late for that virtual PD. I'm now gonna put the link to the survey in the chat as well. So do make sure that you complete the survey. I wanna thank you guys so much for joining me today on the Brush Up on Taxes content webinar. Hopefully this is a good refresher. You're feeling ready to tackle taxes in your classroom. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Make sure you fill out that survey. I'll stick around for a few minutes to answer any questions if anyone's having trouble with the survey. But other than that, thanks guys